Welcome, everyone. As everybody files in here, we're going to give about 3 minutes to get settled. So take your time, do what you got to do, and we will get started in 3 minutes. Thank you for joining. So, Zac, how have you been since the last time we've chatted?
I've been great. Thanks. Been very busy. And we had a couple of big snowstorms out here in Denver, so that's always exciting. But otherwise, it's been nice.
It's interesting because in Minnesota, so I'm outside of St. Paul, we've gotten more snow in the last 4 days than we had all season of winter.
Oh wow. So
It,
what am I? I got nothing to complain about.
it's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, to have nothing all season and then just get dumped on. It's kind of like,
late March,
mm-hmm.
just as you're expecting things to warm up. And
Yeah, the Easter egg
comes.
hunt's gonna be very interesting on Sunday. That's all I can say. Like,
Yeah,
what's
at
the
least
plan,
nothing's
B?
gonna go rotten. And
Go dig in the snowbank for 2 hours. Okay, good
that's
luck.
right.
Love it.
That's right. That's pretty fun.
Yeah, we'll figure something out.
You could dye ice balls or dye snowballs instead of dyeing the eggs.
Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go. I like it.
yeah.
I like it. Thank you all for joining. We will get started in 2 minutes. Yeah, I've had some Easters where like the chocolate has melted in the eggs. Like, you're just like, oh, it's so warm out. And then now it's like, wow,
Sure.
it's like 2 feet of snow.
I guess that reduces if you're not going to bury them in snow. It kind of reduces your options for where to hide those eggs.
It really does. Yeah, it
You're going to
was
have to get
challenging.
creative. Yeah,
Get my mom creative hat on once again.
that's right. Build a fort inside, hide them in that or something.
That would actually be very cool.
That'd be fun.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. We will get started in 1 minute. But they say like by next weekend, it's supposed to be 65 degrees. So it
Oh,
will,
nice. You'll
we'll,
get through it.
yeah, we'll get
Yeah.
through it, but still it's
What
really,
What are you going to do to celebrate in your, balmy, warm 65
yeah, everybody
after
will
being
wear
a,
shorts and flip-flops and yeah, kind of snow in between your toes still, but no, it's 65.
yeah.
We are in Minnesota.
I
Crazy.
visited my brother in Minnesota one year, and it was like a unseasonably warm week in March, and so it had gotten up to like 40 degrees, and everyone was out in t-shirts and
Oh,
was blown away.
yeah.
Yeah.
Top down on the convertible cruising by, like, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
That was awesome. All right, I think we are in. Looks good. Happy Thursday, everyone. I am Tiffany Service Gustafson, a digital strategist with BWG Connect, and we are a network and knowledge sharing group. We stay on top of the latest trends, challenges, whatever's shaping the digital landscape. We want to know and talk about it. We will do at least 500 of these virtual events this year due to the increase in demand to better understand the digital space. And we'll also do at least 100 in-person small format dinners. So if you happen to live in a tier 1 city in the US, always feel free to check out our website, bwgconnect.com, or send us an email. We'd love to send you an invite. These dinners are typically 15 to 20 people having a discussion around a certain digital topic, and it's always a fantastic time. We spend the majority of our time talking to brands. That's how we stay on top of the latest trends. Would love to have a conversation with you, so feel free to send me an email at Tiffany, Tiffany, at bwgconnect.com, and we can get some time on the calendar. It's from these conversations we generate the topic ideas we know people want to learn about, and it's also where we gain our resident experts, such as Zac from Sigil, who's here today. Anybody that we ask to teach the collective community has come highly recommended from brands within our network. So if you're ever in need of any recommendations within the digital space, please don't hesitate to reach out. We have a short list of the best, and we would love to provide that information to you. A few housekeeping items here. We started now about 5 minutes after the hour. Rest assured, we will wrap up at least 5 to 10 minutes before the end of the hour to give you ample time to get to your next meeting or wherever you need to go. And we want this to be fun, educational, conversational. So as many questions, comments you have, please put them into the chat, the Q&A. We will get to them as we move along, or you can always email me at Tiffany at bwgconnect.com, and we will get to them as well. So With that, let's rock and roll and start to talk about practical tips to manage unauthorized resellers and avoid common pitfalls. I'm going to kick it over to you, Zac. The team at Sigil are awesome friends and partners of the network. If you can give a brief introduction on yourself, that'd be lovely, and then we can dive into that information. Thank you.
Great, that sounds good. Thank you so much, Tiffany, and welcome everybody. I'm honored to be here, to be able to participate in this. Like Tiffany said, if you have questions or anything as we go, would love to have you engage with this and make this as valuable for you as I possibly can. And just as a quick aside, Tiffany referenced those dinners from BWG Connect, and I hear all the time from the brands that I work with who attend those events how much value they get out of those dinners. So highly recommend if that's something that you're able to get to. So let me jump in to an introduction about myself briefly here. This is the content that I want to talk about today. I'll introduce myself, give a quick snapshot of the overview of the safeguarding your brand framework. And then I'm going to highlight some traditional, based on feedback from my last time presenting, some of the traditional techniques for dealing with unauthorized sellers, some of the new technologies in the space to make sure that everyone's keeping up to date on the newest trends and technologies. And then we can get into those questions and that discussion. And so let me start with my introduction here. It's always funny when you're staring at a picture of yourself, so apologize if I laugh a little bit about it. But my background is as an intellectual property attorney. I was at a top 10 global law firm where I was representing great global brands like Apple and Samsung, et cetera. And then I went in-house with a brand that was expanding globally. And that was where I really started to learn the full breadth of brand protection issues, from beginning to end. And so I, worked with expert brand protection enforcers, decades of experience who sort of taught me all the different available options and techniques, from raids on factories in China to working with Border Patrol and police to working with the e-commerce agencies and attorneys, at Amazon, Walmart, et cetera. So after several years background in that experience, I had my own legal practice working in this space. And then after representing so many brands in this issue, heard a lot of feedback of additional needs and developments to improve upon the issue of unauthorized sellers. So briefly, just in transparency, I'll get to it later on here in the conversation. But I did then found my current company, Sigil, which auto removes unwanted sellers from Amazon and Walmart. And that's part of the technologies that we can discuss, but that is just one small piece of what I'm here to share with all of you. So with that, we get into kind of set the stage a little bit before diving into some specifics. If any of you saw my last webinar, discussed this safeguarding your brand framework, which I'll pull up here. And I want to give this a quick review so everyone knows about it and where the topics for today fit into this overall framework. But based on the feedback I've heard, I've been asked to narrow down my focus on the final step to this framework, which is cleaning up retail. So that's where I'll get into the techniques on that area. But I want to start with this just as a caveat and as a big picture so that everyone understands when it comes to dealing with unauthorized sellers, that there is a large process to doing it. It's a constantly evolving and ever-changing challenge that brands have. It is a nuance of the impacts of distributing products from one place on the planet to another place on the planet. And so as those methods change, new techniques for securing your success have to come up. So the framework that I typically follow is starting at the bottom here is where you secure your manufacturing and getting into, making sure that your source of truth is strong, and then training your supply chain so that as it comes across to your various markets, that it's being handled correctly. And then in your markets that you're able to clean up the retail presence in those markets. So this last piece, like I said, is going to be the focus of my conversation for today. But if any of you have questions today or later about these other aspects of the framework, then please reach out or ask, and I'm happy to get into it. and we'll go from there. Also, as I discuss some of the details today, you'll hear a lot of different options. If you ever want to get connected with somebody that can help implement any of these solutions or guide you on it, also please reach out and I can get you connected to those folks too. All right. So without further ado, I'll get into kind of the traditional techniques for cleaning up retail, for managing your unauthorized sellers, and then where some of the new technologies are coming into play and the benefits there. For each of these, I'll give kind of a brief description about what the technique is, pros and cons, and then pitfalls that you might run into and recommendations on when best to use these techniques. And to set the stage a little bit, just for clarity, so we all have a good visual of what I'm talking about, the problem that these techniques are all intended to address is when there's someone selling your product on the marketplace, Amazon or Walmart, what have you, that's not supposed to be selling. And that can either be someone who's stealing your buy box or someone who's set up a rogue listing or repackaged your product or something on a different listing and causing confusions or issues. The techniques I'm going to discuss here will apply to both, but you as a brand might be experiencing different pains from those experiences as far as lost sales versus customer confusion or brand damage, etc. These techniques will apply to both of those problem spaces. All right. Here's a review of the traditional techniques for resolving unauthorized sellers online. I'm going to go through these in the order of increasing impact and effectiveness, essentially. So there are notice letters that you can send, investigation demands you can send, and then you can start utilizing your legal documents. So start with notice letters. Notice letters, what are they? Basically, these are just simple messages that you would send out to a seller to let them know that they don't appear to authorized and authorized seller, only authorized sellers are permitted to sell the sign. Now, that does not include a demand of any kind for information or who they are, where they got it. It doesn't include a threat, like we're coming after you, stop or else, etc. Right? Those are the escalations for investigation demands and utilizing legal documents. These are just simple notice letters. Right? The pros of a simple notice letter is it's something that you can do yourself. It's very cost effective, right? It's very simple. You're just sending out that notice. But the trade-off for that is the impact. There's not a lot of teeth there. Now, where it's, it is valuable in certain instances where you have sellers who are kind of your hobbyist arbitrage seller, right? Someone who's gotten some products from here or from there, and they just like playing around with making a difference. Once they get a notice of some kind, they usually move on from the brand because they're not trying to get into any kind of hassle. They don't have the resources for their own attorneys, et cetera. So we see about 20% effectiveness rate usually for brands. I'm going to give some industry estimates here as I go through today. Some caveats as I do that, right? I'm an attorney, so everything is like, it depends, and caveats for things. So some caveats are, one, every brand is unique. So there's going to be different impact to it, right? So you're not all going to hit these metrics. And two, this is assuming kind of a consistent over time utilizing this technique, right? And typically a year or more. If you're doing this stuff, this is where, you tend to see your balance out. Kind of in the bell curve. So some people will be a little higher, some people will be a little bit lower, but it'll give you ballparks for what to expect in each of the different tactics that you deploy here. So notice letters, kind of your first cut, maybe 20% effectiveness. Great for dealing with your hobbyist arbitrage sellers. And if anyone wants me to explain a little bit more about arbitrage, just throw in the comments. I'm happy to get into it. So next, and then there's the pitfall here for each of these. I don't know if I can go back here. There we go. For the pitfall, sending notice letters, the easy way to do it that a lot of brands like to try to do is to send a message in the seller messaging on Amazon or Walmart. And you got to be careful with that because that's not what those messaging channels are intended for. And Amazon and Walmart are trying to reduce the amount of like server traffic they have on there. And so they have, scanners and filters for those messagings, and they'll try to block some of that. Or when it gets through, some sellers will flag it as suspicious reporting activity, et cetera. And so your account for messaging can get blocked or suspended if you are utilizing it. There's also a cap, not a lot of people know this, there's actually a cap of the number of messages that can be sent a day. So that's another just sort of limitation to using it. So, best practice if you're sending notice letters is to try to find that person's contact information or that seller that store's contact information, either by looking at their storefront and then trying to find them online or what have you, or you can check the the storefront should give a state or an address. And so you can look on the Secretary of State's website for that state to try to find that store or seller, get a registered agent, et cetera. So that would be, a way to avoid that risk to your marketplace account.
That's really interesting because I played the whack-a-mole days of trying to get unauthorized resellers off of our with our products, and we did use Seller Central a lot because we couldn't figure out who they were. So you say like, and if they don't have a website,
That is the
find these people.
Yeah, that's a great question, Tiffany. And that's also part of the trade-off for this kind of technique. Like many brands choose to keep using the Seller Central, action to try to get a hold of them. If you've got some budget available, there are great investigation firms who can then, run down that contact information. The brand preserve comes to mind, really effective way for, at investigating and getting that contact info. There are also, and I imagine many of the folks here are using, a service like PriceSpider, who has a really big database. So they have the Prowl product, and they have a really big database of that contact information. And so you can sometimes get some wins out of that if you're already utilizing that technology. And that's where we see a lot of brands essentially is lean on that. So if you are using Prowl on PriceSpider, like the intent of that product is that everyone is updating that data. So if you get better, data responses from people, pay it forward, update the data.
Oh, good to know. Cool.
Yep.
And there are, Zac is always dropping the gems. Seriously. Arbitrage, there is some interest in expanding on that if you'd like.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so the concept of arbitrage is essentially where the same product is sold at different prices in different places or different markets. Historically, in fact, the origins of our whole industry is this was international and really leveraging changes in currencies that would happen. And you might sell into one market at a certain price. And then with conversion rates, that same product in another market would be worth a lot more. And that difference there, is the opportunity for profit for resellers. And that profit would be called arbitrage. It's kind of the Jeff Bezos old saying, like, your margin is my opportunity. That is basically what that arbitrage piece is. In the modern environment, we see that arbitrage come up with, liquidators out, or when a big retailer then clearances out a bunch of product, et cetera. And so it's sold at a much lower price on one marketplace or one website than on, say, Amazon or Walmart. You buy it here, and then you're ready for when the prices come back up on the other marketplaces to list it. So it's like a whole TikTok lifestyle. There are SaaS products, that are like arbitrage specific tools to help sellers scan and identify opportunities. And so they'll buy, 10, 20 pieces here, be ready for it. So I flag that because many brands I talk to will say, I have no idea how they're getting this product. Like, it can't be making any margin on this. Like, we're very good at it, et cetera, which I respect. No disrespect to anybody who's doing that, feels that way. But I give that as an example because there's technology for them to really optimize and hone in on. As soon as there's that arbitrage space, someone can jump up and grab it. So anyway, that's where the issue with those hobbyist arbitrage folks come from. It's the whole community, and you can try to knock them down.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Cool. My pleasure. So the step up from notice letters are these investigation demands. and there are firms who will help implement these as well. What you're essentially trying to do with an investigation demand is add on to your newsletter a request for information. You might say, we see that you're selling, we don't recognize you as authorized, provide verification of your authority or license to sell this product, either with your business license, so we can compare you to our records, or proof of receipt or proof of purchase, through an appropriate channel, etc., so that we can review and authenticate you. These investigation demands typically then, or this gets a bit into the pitfall, but some services will say, okay, after we send this demand, depending on how they respond, right, we can make an enforcement action against them. So that's a little tricky. I'll get that to a second. But we get the pros and cons for these investigation demands, right? The big pro for it is you can sometimes get some more information about that leaky source, right? Maybe about that arbitrage leak where it came up. And so it allows you to then, as the brand, to learn about that source and get a bit more proactive about cleaning that up, right? That gets into the framework of training your supply chain, which can be a conversation for another day, but it gives you a little bit more insight on it. The downside to it is it still doesn't carry a whole lot of teeth. And so the effectiveness rate of a demand letter is still relatively low, maybe 30%-ish or so. It's a bit scarier than just the notice. Sometimes you get the info, but unless you add some teeth to it, then it's going to stay low. So then adding teeth to it is that tricky pitfall. And specifically, some brands will send these investigation demands, and if they don't get any kind of response back, they will take the position that it's presumed that the product is counterfeit, and then go on to brand registry or something and submit a counterfeit complaint against that seller. And that is risky. You'll get the seller down. Amazon, Walmart they take counterfeit complaints really seriously. You'll get the seller down. But if it turns out that that product is not counterfeit and that seller responds or complains, then you'll get your brand registry suspended. Or worse, they can have a claim to countersue you. And that doesn't come up often by any means, but I know of a handful of those lawsuits that have happened, in 2023. And so it's something to be concerned about or be aware of, or that's why it's a pitfall, to say the least.
It's good to know. So brand registry, that's the Amazon program. What is the equivalent to Walmart? What is that also called brand registry?
I believe so. I might be blanking on it right now, but they also have a brand registry portal for brands to register with. Walmart, to their credit, is trying hard to catch up, but is just way behind. Right? I mean, I think everyone here can appreciate that Amazon's ability to enforce for this issue is still really challenged, but Walmart's way behind, which is unfortunate. To give a little context to that too, and to maybe have everyone here give a little bit of grace to the Amazon team, they are getting tens of thousands of complaints a day trying to process through that. And 25% of those are false complaints from overseas sellers trying to interfere with other seller activity, et cetera, robot activity, et cetera. And so, Amazon's intentions, I know many of the in-house folks at Amazon, they have very good intentions. They're in that department, they're trying to make it work. There are some just serious challenges on the magnitude and scope of dealing with that. Yeah. So that's investigation letters. And then the next step up after doing investigation letters is, I'm sorry, actually, to jump back. When to use investigation letters? When is it good to use that? I think that this is good for brands who have relatively low budget to address this issue and relatively low insight into their supply chain. So for example, if you're using two-step distribution and you don't have a big budget to go after and enforce for this, investigation demands are a good way to do it, because you can start to get that evidence of where your leaks are coming from and give you some more insights into your distribution network.
Sure.
So
we have a question here that's an interesting one. It goes up, I think, with the Amazon tool. We use a tool called Seller's Site, which requires sellers to provide an invoice. Sometimes these are store receipts. Can a brand require an actual invoice versus receipt as proof of authenticity of the product?
Really good question. And I'm not familiar with seller site specifically, so we just caveat that.
Mhm.
As a general as a general rule, there's no law that requires that seller to respond to you with any of that, be it invoice or receipt at all. And so that's one of the challenges with the investigation demand technique is they can just ignore you, and there's no legal violation to that piece to it. So I hope that answers your question. The other piece I would say is when you get that evidence back, be suspicious, because many folks in this space are, intentionally violating or getting around laws, right? They also forge documents and they share best practices with each other on how best to do it. So you will want to take a keen eye to the documentation that you get and check that invoice number and check the amounts, right? There's ways to then escalate it, because you can then try to build that counterfeit complaint against that seller based on the discrepancies you can find in that. Right? So yeah, it takes a little bit more follow on when you get that information. Cool. Utilizing legal documents. All right. Obviously, I'm an attorney, so I might be a little bit biased in some of this stuff. But on the flip side, nobody hates attorneys more than other attorneys. So the primary legal document we're talking about at this stage is your cease and desist letter. There are other legal documents which are available and other strategies. We can maybe get into that if folks have questions, but by and large, the traditional method at this point is then move on to a cease and desist letter. The cease and desist letter is basically your notice letter and or your investigation demand, and then added to it the threat of lawsuit or litigation. And these can be sent by you, the brand, or by your attorney, and that's true for these other notices and investigation demands, right? It can either come from you or from your attorney. I would strongly encourage everyone to consult with an attorney. Anything I say here is not legal advice, and just be very clear about that. So strongly recommend you consult with your attorney. There are great attorneys in the BW Connect network, pioneers in the space who can really guide you if you have any questions or importance on it. But it's important to know that, with these demand letters, there's typically an explanation of what law is being violated and, a requirement to stop. In rare instances, there's a reason why you should seek an attorney. By accusing someone of violating a law, they now have the right to countersue you in certain circumstances. So that's why it's best to just make sure that some legal counsel has guided you on that. The pros for your cease and desist letters is that it's going to be more effective. It's got higher teeth than the other techniques. It's still not going to solve your problem, right? So we typically see around 60% of sellers are going to get, impacted or scared off from these letters, or just sell through their inventory and move on to another brand, that type of thing, after using these letters for a while. So it's better. The trade-off to that, obviously, you've heard me repeat several times, to get a lawyer. So the expense of it goes up. It can be higher expense on the front end and then come down over time. So there's ways to try to mitigate some of that. But it's important to do it right? So that's what happens. The pitfall is something that I just see working with brands and clients a lot over time, right? Is once you send out that cease and desist letter, you're going to expect a certain number of responses that are going to come back, right? And many will ignore you and just move on, right? Some will abide by the letter and go away, and some will get lawyers, right? And what I like to remind people is, if you got a cease and desist letter, if I sent you a cease and desist letter, what would you do as a responsible brand? You'd get a lawyer, right? You'd hire a lawyer to interpret it and then prepare a response back for you. So a lot of times these cease and desist letters will then kick up attorney responses back, and brands get really upset or angry about it, because now, what do you think that response back is going to be? It's going to be, really aggressive counter demand, et cetera, right? Because each side is trying to take the furthest place they can to pull the negotiation in the middle closer to their end. So that's the pitfall that I like to flag for this is like, those people who have hired lawyers are responsible, parties, and don't get angry at them for doing that. And like set the emotions aside, keep your eye on the bouncing ball, as we say, and don't get bothered by the noise of the accusations, etc. And just focus on what's your intended outcome, right? And if your plan for this program is to hit 60% ish or so of those folks and have them come down, go away, great, right? You don't need to really do anything else. If your plan is to like scorched earth and send that seller into bankruptcy, then yeah, great. Be ready to escalate and get, have the attorneys, go forward there, with the additional legal documents, et cetera. So, and I'm happy to chat about those additional enforcement techniques or those other litigation documents if people have questions about it. But otherwise, I'm going to continue. So these are the traditional techniques. And before I jump over into kind of the new technologies that we see, I also want to just have like a couple of parting thoughts for how to make the traditional techniques work and be most effective for brands. As I kind of flagged in the beginning, brand protection is an ongoing and evolving issue. I know everyone hates the notion of whack-a-mole, but right now that is just the reality. As we sell new products in new places, new platforms, you'll have new people testing out those areas. There's two other things that I want you guys to think about when deploying these. One is a response that can happen with all three of these techniques is that the seller just wants you to buy back the inventory. We're probably all familiar with that concept or buyback programs in general, or if not, I'm happy to get into some of the recommended best practices or details of that. But buying back inventory is a good way of getting that seller off your plate forever. So, and the reason for that is you can get them to sign the contract, agreeing never to sell that product anymore or anything from that brand. You can have them disclose the source of where they got it, so you can close that leak, right? It's a really good way for long-term results to impact the problem. Unfortunately, many companies, almost all the companies I talk to, are not prepared for using that technique because they haven't allocated like budget for it, or they don't have the proper procedures in-house to recognize the accounting aspect of it, or to receive back the inventory to their warehouse or to their 3PL, et cetera. So this gets into the other parts of the safeguarding your success framework and training your supply chain, et cetera. But I like to flag it for you all here because if you can, like, as you're setting your budgets going forward for next year, add budget for buyback. And that way, when you go in to set this up or you're sending your desist letters, et cetera, you have budget available that you can then negotiate with for buying that inventory back out. And it's at least a starting point for you to kind of train your own organizations to be ready for that. So that's one parting thought on the traditional techniques. And then my final parting thought is, look, you saw the impact percentages here on the traditional techniques are going to be 60, maybe you up to 70% for this, but you're not usually going to get much more than that over time unless you're doing something else, unless you're adding more controls in your supply chain, or you're using some of the new technologies for something. So just keep that in mind. All right, new technologies. This is the exciting stuff. So today I want to provide an update on kind of the state of play. These are like the hot new techs that have come up in the last like 4 years or so, I would say, in the brand protection space. Right? I'm sure we're all familiar with blockchain and artificial intelligence. And it's been really interesting to see these technologies applied to the unauthorized seller space. So blockchain, obviously, with a lot of the Web3 and the crypto encouragement, there was a lot of excitement, or especially early on, in getting the blockchain in as a piece to track and solve this issue. The challenge has always remained, how do you connect up your digital token onto your actual inventory? And that there have been improvements in that process, but it is still fundamentally, the biggest challenge to rolling that out. There are though, there are ways to do it, so that's good. But you're looking at using blockchain in brand protection is really a method, kind of the new way for doing serialization of your products, your UPCs, your SKU numbers. So if you're already, in a spot where you're serializing products and you've made investments in some of that infrastructure, et cetera, then maybe this is a good innovation that to add to it, right? To try to resolve some of the issues, because over time, as products continue out in circulation, those serialized codes don't update well, and so you can run into issues on the data for that. Whereas you can update on the blockchain as you see things and scan them, and you can. There are some clever techniques utilizing like marketing QR codes for folks to engage with the product in an interesting way, and when they scan it, they also end up updating the blockchain application, et cetera. So there's blockchain tech to come into play, but the trade-off to it is if you're not already in a position where you're prepared to serialize products, it's probably just going to be too expensive. And this, it requires added technology, just like any other serialization, where you're going to be, it's like you're stickering, or you've got different technology, you've got some capital investment you've got to do, and then your per unit costs are going to go up. And so, really, this is like what I would tell brands is, I think the blockchain and serializing works best when it's like a higher priced item, so you don't have just a ton of these, relatively inexpensive products, so that the per unit cost is not as big a percentage impact to your item. So it's tricky for like CPG, and you've got just millions and millions of units of whatever bar that you might be eating. It's just tricky to do it for that. But other higher ticket items are a little bit better. Happy to
for the serialization, the blockchain. I mean, is that a process? Are you using a certain program? Is there agencies that specialize in that? How do you do that?
Yeah, so and I'm happy to follow up and make references to connect folks on that. It's a little I wish I could give like ballparks for pricing and how that works, but basically it really depends on your manufacturing, shipping, like how centralized control your distribution techniques are, and then your product. So let me explain. For the companies that do this, right, you've got to basically scan or attach something to your product. You either scan your product and encode that scanned image into your system as like the blockchain unique identifier, or you're attaching something to it. And so the fewer points of like bottlenecks of where, or just the fewer sources for where hubs, the fewer like hubs that you have for your inventory, be it factories or warehouses or shipping, then the less capital investment there is to install the piece of technology to it. And then the other piece to it is just the sheer volume of your products that you're moving through, and how you have to sticker, and how you pack, and how you handle your pick packs, et cetera. So, but the technologies will then typically provide a software program for you to then log in and see, and get the list of everything and where it's scanned, and et cetera.
Got it.
Let's see here. I'm checking my notes briefly. Great. So yeah, and the pitfall I like to flag, and this is kind of true for any serialization technique, right, is just getting confirmation before jumping down the throat of one of your partners or shipping partners. And sometimes things happen, or companies go to business and liquidate, but everything was done. Everybody tried their best to do it the right way, and so product shows up where it's not supposed to. And you don't want to jump down the throat of one of your important partners without having a bit of a confirmation that they really did do something tricky. And there's other techniques we can get into for that. Again, part of the whole framework. That's just the one thing I'd say. I think a lot of the serialization proponents will talk about serialization as like a real, like, it's the end all be all. We've got everything we track, where every product is at all times. And that's just not quite right. So careful there. AI. Artificial intelligence, pretty exciting. So as a caveat, artificial intelligence impacts all of these techniques, right? And so we're going to see changes in, notice letters, right? You can automate that, or if you're doing those investigation demands, you know, AI automatically reviewing response back and try to generate, return response, et cetera. So there's going to be impacts of AI on all of the techniques, that we've described so far, essentially. And this is really young. We're still learning, what's going to work and the, things that are playing out here. Um, Obviously, I'm a little bit biased, but I want to share with you briefly about Sigil and Sigil's auto removals, the way that we decided to try to implement AI to innovate in this process. So I'll talk about that. But again, happy to be transparent and try to make this informative and valuable and not push anything on anybody. So with the Sigils service, the way it uses AI for auto removals is it's a combination of human investigator with AI tools to then identify these unauthorized sellers and then send evidence of their violations straight to the marketplace, straight to Amazon or Walmart, et cetera. So it sidesteps the traditional methods. You don't have to do any notice letters, investigation demands, or legal documents that are being sent. None of that process is necessary because the evidence can be presented directly to the marketplace. And so that saves on time. It increases the reliability of the information, and it lowers the cost. So that technique has been really effective. The brands who are using the auto removal service and can get the type of impact or effectiveness rates of using the traditional techniques plus the other safeguarding your brand techniques, all with just having to without having to implement all of that. So we're seeing a higher effectiveness rate with the auto removals. If you do it all together, auto removals plus that safeguarding your brand framework, we have brands who hit the high 90s% of effectiveness in that scenario. So that's useful. That's sort of the pros to it, to using the kind of the auto removals. I would say the cons to this right now, the early days, is we're still learning, where AI is going to live in this, in the zeitgeist, and this technology is still pretty narrowly applied, right? Really only effective on marketplaces. And so other issues where you have sellers, say rogue, Shopify sites, et cetera, this type of technology is not at that point to address that. So pretty narrowly applicable, depending on what your problem set is. And then the pitfall, I think this is important for anybody using AI in any of their tools, just for you all to be aware. If you're using AI and it's related to any of like your legal rights, courts are still like very highly skeptical of how to treat that. And there is an expectation that humans are still being reasonable and responsible in the way that they're deploying their AI. And so putting your hands up and just saying, well, the AI is doing this is really like not recommended right now for those of us who are seeing it on the legal side or the legal tech side. So it's important that you have, a human pilot involved in that process, especially when you get to the point of trying to assert or enforce those rights, regardless of what service or technology you're using. Great. So that is kind of the overview of your traditional options, some of where the new technology is coming into place. And so I kind of want to jump into, questions or discussion if anybody has for this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Like it was said, always bringing out the gems of knowledge with these webinars. Appreciate you. Questions, comments put into the chat or the Q&A. We do have a couple here in queue. So the transparency program, that is an Amazon program. Would you signify that as a traditional technique, or is that more of a new technology? Maybe expand the tradition in case nobody.
Oh, thank you. You're right, Tiffany. Good point. So Amazon Transparency is a program that essentially adds a serialization code or number to your Amazon inventory that Amazon does. Amazon gives you that number and that code. And it's really effective at and intended for dealing with counterfeits. So that way, anybody else who has product that looks identical to you but doesn't have that code can't get it onto the online marketplace. I put it in the traditional technology suite because it's essentially a serialization technique. Maybe it's in that hybrid, but the pitfall for Amazon transparency is that it's not intended, and their policies are very clear, it's not intended for resellers. And so brands can get their account suspended if they are using Amazon transparency to try to stop the reseller issue. And so I always like to ask brands when they are looking into it, like, well, hey, are you having a counterfeit problem or are you having a reseller problem? Because if it's a counterfeit problem and you have relatively low units per, and good price point, so it's a low per unit impact, it's a great solution.
And is there a transparency program equivalent at Walmart.com?
No, not yet. And this is part of my worry for brands going forward. I think we all recognize that Walmart.com is a growing and increasing marketplace. It's growing faster than Amazon, but that's not too surprising just given the size disparities. But their rate of growth has been really outstanding. And Walmart's just strongly investing in that path going forward and improving on their shipping and et cetera. Like, in my belief, it's an inevitability that Walmart will reach the same market cap, volume for e-commerce that Amazon has. Give it maybe 4 years, but I think that they'll get there. In that context, like I said, Walmart's behind on the processes that Amazon has deployed. Well, Walmart is copying the Amazon playbook, like move for move, even hiring people internally to make sure that they are copying move for move. So I suspect a Walmart transparency program will come, but then that adds a lot of challenge. Like I was talking to a brand recently that was struggling with managing their warehouse space because now you've got to ensure that you've got dedicated units, Amazon transparency stickered there. You have dedicated units, Walmart transparency stickered in another spot. You might have units that you want to be stickered for both, depending on how it ships. And so there's just a lot to evaluate and what that's going to turn out to be. So that is a technology that's still unfolding, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all moving very fast. A lot of change.
Yeah.
Questions, comments as we in the final moments here, put them in and we'll get to them. This is a situation actually I had, and just to confirm this for the audience. So if you have a product that you're selling on one site and you do a sale, and then somebody bought that and listed it, let's say on Amazon, but they shipped it to the customer through that other website, can you do a cease and desist through Amazon through that?
So, like, yes and no. The yes part to it is you can certainly file a complaint about it. You can certainly report them as a violation of Amazon terms of service for doing that kind of drop shipping. That is typically not something that Amazon listings are supposed to do or supposed to cover. The reason why I say no is just the reliability of getting a response from that is low. Pretty rare that we see those complaints, they kind of hit the black box of behind the scenes at Amazon. It's pretty rare for those to then come forward and get dealt with, especially before that seller has already moved on the available inventory for dropship and moved on. So in theory, yes. In theory, I wouldn't categorize it as a cease and desist. A cease and desist would be a violation of your legal rights that have occurred. It's more of like a reporting a violation of the Amazon terms of service. It's just tricky to really get that one to hammer home. Yeah, and when you see that, I would say to brands, like, if you have an Amazon seller rep, ping them as quick as you can and try to reach out to them to say, what's the best way of addressing this? It's a big problem, et cetera, and see if they can, shine a little light in the black box for you to try to pull that lever a little faster. But I don't have high confidence that you're going to see a lot of impact from that.
Got it. And here's another situation where you have a third-party seller that is purchasing from authorized resellers for the brand. but they themselves are not authorized and they're selling on Amazon. Do
Mhm.
you have options with that scenario?
Yeah, you do. If you have the right foundation of legal documents, then you can do either the traditional techniques, which I would recommend legal documents, right? So you've got attorneys involved, or that is also a scenario where sigils auto removals can come into play. Again, assuming that the right foundation of legal material is there. So those are kind of the two options to address that problem. And again, happy to like
Mhm.
for a call like this with so many folks, it's like it depends. But yes, there's
Yeah,
options, and happy to chat with folks after to point them in the right direction.
fantastic. So how do you manage reseller authorization when your product is sold through distribution partners?
Great question. You're gonna your best move there is going to be starting like now you're in the rest of the framework where I talked about, which is kind of step two, where you're training your supply chain and techniques around that. I would like, there are good policies, documentations, et cetera, to get involved for that. Then the other piece is going to be using technology or just some trickery for tracking the supply chain and seeing where things go and encouraging proper behavior through the supply chain. So like one of my favorite kind of low cost ways is by sending dummy or decoy sort of like this shipment is being tracked materials and products, et cetera, through. And so even if you don't have full insight as to like through because you have that two-step distribution, you can still kind of encourage proper behavior through some of those proper techniques. So I'm happy to get into that again more at the right time.
Awesome. And I know we focused on the two major marketplaces, Amazon and Walmart, but have you seen anything with Temu?
Oh boy, Timo. I have not seen a lot of activity in Temu because a lot of the brands we deal with are just having what I call knockoffs sold on Temu as opposed to
Hmm.
like counterfeit to resellers, et cetera. And so the Temu space, so the legal implication, the legal options in the Temu world are a little bit different, right? You're going to be looking for intellectual property around, patents of design or utility patent related, maybe copyright images if you have some aspect of that to it. Um, don't rely on trade dress. Anybody here who's thinking that trade dress is going to help them when it comes to online and brand protection, like trust me, I've tried it. Don't use it. Don't think it's going to help you. So that's what I would say. I haven't seen a lot of activity in Temu because it's not a space where we focus on, but it'd be a different kind of set of tactics on that.
Awesome. Well, as always, thank you so much, Zach. It's always fun and entertaining to talk to you. I always take away something, learn something new every time. So appreciate you and thank you all for joining today. We definitely encourage follow-up conversations with Zach and the Sigil team. They are awesome at what they do. We'd love to have a conversation with you too. That's how we gain the intel and the content ideas for future webinars. So feel free to reach out, Tiffany at bwgconnect.com. So with that, it is a wrap. Happy Thursday, everyone, as we head into the weekend. Take care. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thanks, Zach.
everyone. Bye.